our logic ceiling will tighten up and we can't hear anything outside of that. And if it gets even more of a threat, we get pulled down into the emotional space, and our emotions will tell us that we're in dis-ease. And if it gets pulled down even more, we move into the body space, which would be the fight or flight space. And this is where you're not hearing anything except I have to run and hide, or I have to fight something off and away from me. So when we're in stress, the logic ceiling becomes contracted.
Some things need to be healed in community, and we offer you something unparalleled with the Condor Approach Live. We're going to talk about how to prepare for, navigate, and integrate your psychedelic experiences for yourself or those that you love. These live events are catalysts. They really allow you to uncover and unleash the potential that you already have within you. When you're surrounded by like-minded people who are walking the walk and are committed to the path, you may even find your next facilitator or coach, but this event is designed to foster genuine relationships, give you community that supports and uplifts you, wants to see you win. If you've been wanting to embody this understanding and take these skills to a new level, then a live dynamic environment is just the way. You can go to thecondorapproach.com. That is thecondorapproach.com, and we will see you in February.
Whether you're a life coach, therapist, biohacker, invested in wellness, or in the healthcare profession, if you have an intention to work in psychedelic spaces, you're in the right place then. If you're called, get involved. But first, get informed. Let's talk the 4 N's: intake, intention, in-space integration. Leading to deeper transformations. Psychedelic Coach Podcast, Talk Cole. Walk you through the process, it's all possible. Leave space for the follow through. Most importantly, integration is not optional.
Peace, everybody on Facebook. Welcome to Masterclass Mondays. It's an amazing Monday. We're here to talk about something that is extremely important. I would love to hear from you. Pop in the chat where you're hailing from. Would love to hear about that. We're here today to talk about some really important and potent stuff on Masterclass Mondays, and your participation is really important. If you have an opportunity to drop a 1 in the chat to let me know that you're there. I've been a nurse for 31 years, and I've had the distinct honor of being able to work with veterans from wars, from World War II, from the Vietnam War, from the Gulf War, from so many different wars. I've had the opportunity to work with vets and support them in moving through spaces around PTSD and these dynamics. And it was really hard on my body to witness what happened to these people's bodies. And I started to examine and explore what war was in a grand scope, in the grand scheme of things. And I started to see that there was a lot of blame being placed on one side or the other. And these troops were the people who walked through the war, and they fought on behalf of either side of what was going on in the war. And no matter what happened, no matter what the outcome of the war, these bodies were affected. These people were affected. Their families were affected. The people around them were affected. The careers that they had were affected. Everything about their lives was affected, and they didn't know how to navigate it. And that was a huge part of what was going on with these people, is that they didn't know how to navigate it. And when I stepped away from working with vets, I worked with just day-to-day, everyday people. And I found that everybody was at war at some point in their lives. And the wars were going on just incessantly. So if you know anybody who's been in a wartime situation, I'd love to hear from you. Pop a 2 in the chat and let me know if that's something that you've seen, that's something that you've been exposed to, your family's been exposed to, any vets, anybody that you've worked with or dealt with PTSD. Perfect. Yeah, it's a very common space. And it's something that unfortunately is a part of our world right now. As we see what's going on in our world with things in the Middle East, it can be really challenging. So I invite you to take deep breaths as we go through this talk, this masterclass, this presentation, to make sure that you are staying in your body and that you feel safe. It's really important when we talk about these things because war it's not just an ideological space, it's a physiological space. That's what I want to dive into today. So thank you so much. And I'd love it if everybody could take a couple of deep breaths with me so we can get started. Nice exhale. Deep inhale through the nose. And exhale. And inhale through the nose. And exhale. And inhale through the nose one more time. And exhale. Perfection. Showing up when the world is at war, making sense of it all. That's today's topic. I'm Todd Whitty. I've been a registered nurse for 31 years. I am the co-creator and co-founder of the Condor Approach. It is a methodology for navigating the world through a psychedelic informed lens. And this doesn't mean that we have to use psychedelics. It means that the lens that we work from is psychedelic informed. And so many of the things that we use in the Condor Approach can be used on a day-to-day basis. And I encourage people to use them on a day-to-day basis. But when applied through a psychedelic lens, things can change dramatically. I've worked with people from all over the world. I've worked in New York City for 25 years in the emergency room, and I've seen a lot. So I'm not going to dive too deep around me. You can find out a lot about me on our Facebook page. You can find out a lot about me, just Google. Right. Cool. So I've had an opportunity to care for veterans of wars, and these are some of the most dedicated human beings I've ever met in my life. And no matter what happens, what's going on with war or not, human beings are some of the most loyal humans in the world when it comes to each other and the countries that they serve. And I find that their bodies have been placed into positions of being utilized as tools for destruction. And the destruction doesn't come without reason. There's lots of reason behind it. And people say war is pointless. And there is truth to that. And there's truth outside of that as well. So war is more than tanks and battlefields, y'all. Much more. Which is why knowing how to show up when war is present is key. It's very important to know how to show up when war is present. And so what I want you to expect today from this presentation is the what and where of war. Okay. The what. What is war and where does war occur? The second thing I want to talk about and dive into is how do we make sense of war? And we're going to go into the Condor concept called the logic ceiling. And this is a concept that came through me as all of these concepts move through me. They tie together a lot of the work that I've done in my life. And it's been a very important way that the Condor coaches and the people that have come to the Condor approach have learned to follow their own nervous systems and the nervous systems around them to see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. This can support us in moving away from arguments and away from conflict and into a space of cohesion. And I'm going to show you what that's about. The third thing we're going to talk about is how psychedelics can help with navigating war. And I'm talking about navigating war on an individual basis and a close proximity basis of the people around you, navigating the situation around how we anchor our nervous system. So that's the three things that I want you guys to expect today for today's masterclass. So what is war? And so I'd love to see in the comments, in the chat, what do you believe war is? Now, I hear all the time that war it's unnecessary, it's killing, it's violence, it's a lot of different things. What is war to you? War is a symptom of disconnection and separation. The ideas that we have around separation are what cause war. It is not the war that is the thing. The war is a symptom. When people are fighting, it's a symptom. If I have a headache, right, it's a symptom of something. It's not just a headache randomly out of nowhere. It's a symptom of maybe banging my head against the wall. It's a symptom of maybe being dehydrated. It's a symptom. So war is a symptom of disconnection and separation. And whenever we have separation, and that can be separation by idea, separation by landmass, separation by race, identity, all of these things that we create, it is a symptom of separation. And that is the lens that we move from at the Condor approach when we're talking about war. there are 7 stages of war development. And I wanted to bring this to the table because this is the lens that I see war through. Okay. This is not a law. This is how I see things. And it's the lens that I move through. The first thing is dis-ease. Something is uneasy about a person, about a country, about a situation. There's a dis-ease that happens. Okay. And I'm talking about being out of relaxation, out of being calm. I'm not talking about an illness. There is a dis-ease. We are uneasy. That's the first part. That's the first thing that leads to war. The second thing is multiple perspectives based upon the disease. So we have the disease, right? It may be, this is unfair. I don't like my money being taken from me by the government. And then the government has another perspective. You need to pay me because I'm fixing the streets and I'm keeping you safe. And so there are multiple perspectives that appear based upon this dis-ease. The third thing is the disagreement. There's a non-mutual perspective about and beliefs about the disease. Okay. So it's not mutual. We don't agree on the disease, right? Hey, listen, you people have been put over there. You do things this way. And so you don't get these rations because of the way that you act. And the people over there are like, hey, we're human beings. We believe that everybody should have this. And why should we be banned from food or whatever the resource is because of the way we act? And so it's a non-mutual perspective. And there can be multiple non-mutual perspectives, but it's generally two very popular opposing viewpoints. And when we look at the United States of America, we have many political parties, but we have 2 main political parties that run this country. And that would be the Democrats and the Republicans. And these 2 parties are always back and forth with a disagreement. And that's the third part that leads to war. The fourth is confrontation about the disagreements is brought to the table. And so if I don't like something about what's going on, I bring it to the table and I say, hey, this isn't cool. And the other person may come to the table and say, hey, it is cool. And then we have confrontation around these differing ideas around what is uneasy in one place or another. Okay. And so these are the things that are really important to understand about war. This is what leads to the symptom. The fifth thing is opposition. There's pushback in regards to the rights and wrongs. And so it's, hey, listen, I deserve this right and that's wrong over there. So I'm going to resist and I'm not going to do this as a result of that. And so then there's another pushback from the other side. And so you're getting this opposition of pushback back and forth. Intention starts to build up. Then we have conflict. When there's an inability to resolve disagreement, it leads to aggressive actions for change. And so this is where it's okay. If you're not gonna relent, if you're not gonna do it my way, then I'm gonna get dicey and I'm gonna move forward and I'm gonna do something that is gonna move the needle in my direction. So the needle comes to my direction, and then the other side may push back so that the needle goes in their direction. And so you have this back and forth conflict. The 7th part is violence. Violence is the 7th part of war. And so these are the things that I'm going to take it back to the beginning so we can just go through the 7 stages of war development. But we have dis-ease, we have multiple perspectives, we have disagreement, we have confrontation, we have opposition, we have conflict, and then we have violence. And violence is where we start to fight with one another. We start to put our hands on one another. We start to disrupt things. And this is the part that people really despise about it, because then it's, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How could you do this? And then we start to throw blame and shame, and we don't take our responsibility in the war space. The next thing we're going to talk about is, where is war, right? Where is war? Now, when I ask this question to people who come to me and need support with this wartime stuff, they say the war is in Palestine and Israel right now. And yes, okay, war can be everywhere at all times. It is always present. As long as we've been on this planet as human beings, we have been warring in one way or another. And this is part of our evolution, is to be able to move through this and to see war for what it is. It's a violent space that is a symptom of disconnection and separation. and it can be everywhere. Now, I've had people say, what are we going to do about war? And they're talking about what's going on in the Middle East. And meanwhile, they're having wars in their homes and they haven't resolved these things. So war can be everywhere, and it's usually in people's homes. And before it's in a person's homes, it's a person's home. It's usually within the self. Okay. So war can occur between nations. And it can occur in families. It can occur in spouses. And this is one of the things that I've had to work with. And me and Cole have done a lot of work around relationships. And this is one of the things we've been talking about at Masterclass Mondays a lot, is the relationship aspect between spouses, siblings, family members, friends. These are the places where war can occur. But the most important place that I find that war happens is within the self. A person is warring with their ideas, with their constructs, with their belief structures within themselves. So the root of war is safety. And safety is the power to be free. Okay? The power to be free. People will say power is at the root of war. And the power to be safe is absolutely the foundation of any war space. Now, we're talking about free from what? And we have these attributes that we talk about at the Condor approach. Hurt, right? Which is physical or emotional damage. Harm, which would be damage to someone's reputation or someone's well-being, right? Their physical well-being as well. Loss, which would be deprivation of someone or something, when somebody loses someone or something. And we have deaths in war. Deficit, lack of something essential. Injury, physical harm or death, physical harm or damage, and death, which would be the cessation or the stopping of life. And the last thing would be pain, an unpleasant physical sensation. So we have hurt, harm, loss, deficit, injury, death, pain. When those things are not present, we are not safe. And there are many people who I've had a conversation with about war recently who have said, if there's a dictator and they have bombs and they can bomb somebody and kill all these people, how are they not safe? And my question is, if they were safe, why would they need to bomb something else? And when we think about safety, many people think about the primary safe space of just being alive and having food and water. But if the structure of your government is not safe, if the structure of your convenience is not safe, that can cause a person pain, right? And that can cause them hurt, harm, to feel loss, deficit, injury, death, or pain. And it may not make sense to you as an individual because you see something different. And so this is where we stop being in cohesion. We start being separate because it's like, okay, that person's safety is not valid and those people's safety is not valid. And so we have these disruption, and then we move through those 7 stages of war. How do we make sense of war, right? How do we really make sense of it for ourselves? This is the question. And this is what this masterclass is about. It's like, how do we make sense of war? And at the Condor approach, we have something called the logic ceiling. Okay. Logic is something that makes sense. And if we can all agree on that for the sake of this conversation, logic is something that makes sense. If you agree with that, can you just pop a 2 in the chat so that I know that we're on board, that we're in the same space? Logic is something that makes sense. Okay. That's it. It's just something that makes sense. It makes sense for me to be sitting in this chair so that I'm not falling on the floor while I'm doing this presentation. It makes sense that if it's really hot, I turn on the air conditioning. It makes sense, right? Cool. Thank you so much. It really helps me to know that y'all are on track with what I'm talking about when you pop these things in the chat. So thank you for joining in with me on that. So there are different levels of logic. When we talk about the logic ceiling is a theoretical framework that we use to determine a person's ability to make sense of things, right? And so if a person's ability is different than mine to make sense, then we're never going to be on the same page. And this is where we have the separation. And so there are different levels of making sense. And I'm going to talk about those. And remember, the logic ceiling is like a seal around you. And it's like the ceiling above you. We have the red layer, we have the green layer, we have the light blue layer, we have the dark blue layer, and we have the purple layer, which is the outer layer. So the first layer, the base layer, is called body logic. And body logic is the logic of the physical body. It's what makes sense for you to exist as a physical person, for you to process energy, for you to eat food, for you to be in your experience, for you to be in this 3D realm, to survive and to move into a thrive space. And so if I get a cut on my hand, Do I need to tell my body, okay, I want you to send fibrinogen and platelets and all these coagulating factors to this one area? And I don't need to do that. The body's logic does that. When I smell food, I start to salivate. It's logical. It makes sense to the body to prepare to digest. This is body logic. And the logic of the body, the logic of all of the microbiome that live within us, all of that stuff makes sense to the body. Okay, it doesn't need to make rational sense as to why it does it, just does it. We take in oxygen, you exhale carbon dioxide, it makes sense to the body. The next logic space is emotional logic. Now, emotional logic is what makes sense for us to understand if we're in ease or dis-ease. And so anger, for example, is an emotion. And anger is a protective mechanism. If I am my anger comes online. When I become safe, my anger starts to dissipate because the threat is gone. And so the threat is a dis-ease space. Okay? It's a dis-ease space. When I am sad, it's a dis-ease space. And it makes sense to tell me that I need connection. When I lose something or somebody moves away from me or I have a breakup or somebody passes away, I feel disconnection. And so that's a dis-ease space. And the sadness is actually telling me to get connected. I go to ease. So emotions tell us if we're in ease or dis-ease. That's the emotional logic space. The construct logic space is the space where the things that we believe in, the things that we adhere to, our identities, our race, religion, gender, ethnicity, nationality, religious situations. I think I said that already. All of these things are constructs. And so what makes sense to the construct gets embedded in the logic ceiling. And so sometimes we can fall back into that. And it's, okay, it makes sense that if I pray to God, I go to heaven because my religion tells me that, right? And so I believe in that, so I can fall back into that space and I don't have to think about it because it makes sense to the religion, right? It's, okay, I'm an American, so I do things this way. It makes sense to the construct of nationality, right? So that's a construct. The next layer of the logic ceiling is the mind or mental logic space. And mind logic is rational sense, okay? And so this is a place where we can be creative and we can volley back and forth. So most of us right now, I would say, in this conversation are in the mind logic space. Right? I'm offering information, you're taking information, and when I ask you to respond to me, you deliver like ones and comments and stuff like that. And so we're in a rational logic space. And so what's happening right now is we are in a mind space and we're juggling information back and forth, and you are making rational sense of it. Now, if it doesn't make rational sense based on your constructs or the things that you believe in, you can ask questions and then I can volley back to you. And since we're in a safe enough space, we have the time and the bandwidth to be here. That's the mind logic space. The next layer is what we call the spirit logic space. Now, spirit logic makes sense just to exist. Okay. And so everything comes from spirit. And in the context that I say spirit is energetics, the universe, whatever you want to call it, God, some people call it God, whatever you choose to call it, that is spirit logic for the sake of what we're talking about with the logic ceiling. And this is raw information comes from. And so when we're in an expanded space, we can grab new information, bring it back into the mind, rational sense about it, apply it to a construct, make a construct, then apply that construct to our emotional complex and then experience it through the body. And so this is where we grab raw information from. Now, the spirit logic space is a space where when we are extremely relaxed, we get into, when we're dreaming and when we're sleeping, we get into that space. And when we're in psychedelics, we can get into the spirit logic space from an awareness position. I actually feel and know that spirit logic encompasses all of the logic ceiling. So everything dwells within that space. And if this is making sense to y'all, pop in the chat, let me know. And this is a theoretical framework. And this is something that I use so that I can get people to start to understand where other people may be. Now, when you look at the body logic space, okay, when you look at the body logic, which is the foundational logic space, and a person is stressed out, the logic, their ability to be logical goes in. It gets what I call tight. And so when we are stressed or in disease, our ability to make sense of things contracts down to the construct level. And so if you're talking something rational to somebody and they're like, no, but you give them the dynamics and the evidence and they still won't listen, they may be in a tight or diseased space, and their construct may be in a diseased space. So how many times have you been speaking to somebody about something that totally made sense to you and they could not get it? And they kept going back into a default of, nope, that's what the church says, so I'm not doing it. Nope, that's what the government says. That's what my teacher says, so I'm not listening to it. And cognitive dissonance is a really important space to understand and know about, because cognitive dissonance is where a lot of people in the world are right now. And we are dissonant to one another, and we will not listen based on our construct space. So if our construct, that blue layer, right, if we believe so heavily in something and we're threatened by any other ideas outside of that, our logic ceiling will tighten up and we can't hear anything outside of that. And if it gets even more of a threat, we get pulled down into the emotional space, and our emotions will tell us that we're in dis-ease. And if it gets pulled down even more, we move into the body space, which would be the fight or flight space. And this is where you're not hearing anything except I have to run and hide, or I have to fight something off and away from me. So when we're in stress, the logic ceiling becomes contracted. Now, when we're in ease or relaxation, the logic ceiling expands, and we can expand outwardly into a position where we can get new information and consider new things. And if our constructs are threatened, if who we are is threatened, if our identities are threatened, we may not be able to get out into that space and see something different. And if the world is in a position, if there's places in the world where where people have limited access to food, people have limited access to resources, where bombs are being dropped, where do you think their logic ceiling is going to be? It's going to be really tight. And so they'll do whatever they can to get themselves into a position where their logic ceiling can actually open up. And this is one of the things that I invite you to lean into when you're considering things about war, is where are the logic ceilings of the people that you're looking at, that you're looking to get rational sense from? Are their logic ceilings tight, or are their logic ceilings expanded? And this is one of the things. I'm going to stop the share for a second so I can just give you a visual representation with me of the logic ceiling. So if the logic ceiling is if my hand is the body, right? If this is the body, it's really tight. And when I'm stressed, I'm in body and I can't hear anything. This is where we would be in fight or flight. When I get safe enough that I know my body is not going to be threatened, I can expand out into the emotional space, and I can actually detect if I'm in ease or dis-ease, so I know how to move away from it. If I get into an ease space, I can move out into this space where I can honor my constructs and my belief structures, my beliefs on what's right and what's wrong, who's the person that is my family and who's my enemy. I can move into that space. When I still feel that I'm safe even more, I can expand out into the mind space where we can have conversations like the ones are happening right now are happening. When I feel even more relaxed, when I'm able to meditate or just be alone and quiet in my body, I can expand out into a space where I can grab new ideas and information. And I get that information and I bring it back in and I apply it to my whole organism. And so the logic ceiling is actually doing this all the time. It's expanding and contracting all the time. But if a person's logic ceiling is tight all the time because of threats, and their nervous system and their body has been built around fear and threat, they get locked in there, and the nervous system actually becomes a big trauma response all the time. So our nervous systems become an actual trauma response, and the body gets built around it. And so we save body fat, we get into closed off postures, and the nervous system actually fortifies this. And so we become a body of war, okay? And we become a body that has been threatened. And so we're always warring with the environment. We're warring with ourselves inside. And this is a very challenging space for a lot of people to understand when they are in a threat space all the time. They don't know this. And so this is where, if you are in a contracted space in your logic ceiling all the time and things don't make sense, or everybody else can't get with what you're saying, this is where, how do you get the environment to integrate with you? This is part of what we talk about at the Condor approach, and it's something that I really highly invite y'all to come to the Condor approach. This is a concept that I'm really giving you the nuts and bolts of it right now, but in order to get into a deeper space, coming to the Condor approach is something that I highly recommend doing so that you can dive deeper with us and with the community. So I'm going to go back to sharing. Cool. How can psychedelics help with war? Psychedelics help because they support us in dismantling what we would call the default mode network. We have our brains filled into networks of how we wire. And let's say an old protective mechanism is wired into our brains in a certain way. When we go into psychedelics, allow us to disrupt that network, and we can actually reprogram into a different pattern. And so this is why we're able to see things differently when we're in psychedelics, when we have psychedelic experiences. It's like, oh man, it makes so much sense now. How did I not see that my whole life? Because physiologically, your brain has been actually wired so that the impulses flow a certain way. And when we get into psychedelics, we actually let go of that network and we can ride into different networks of nerves and see things in patterns we haven't before because that mechanism has been disrupted. And so this is why psychedelics are very important in supporting people in moving out of their old mindset that would keep them locked in a warring pattern. And if we're in a warring pattern with our family members and we don't know how to get out of it, psychedelics are an amazing adjunct to talk therapy, to having a coach and so on. And this is a really important space. When you use tools like the logic ceiling and psychedelics at the same time, it can support you in dismantling these ideas and reprogramming from a space that you choose and that you want. And this is where having an awesome facilitator helps that as well. And dismantling old perspectives is a tremendously important space with psychedelics that help with war. If we are war now, you're talking to a person who has been constantly at war with himself for, I'm 50, I'll be 52 in December. I'd say until I was 43, I was consistently at war with myself, consistently at war with my environment, consistently at war. And I couldn't understand why the world was warring the way it was. And I wasn't looking at myself. And so dismantling the old ways of seeing things that may be rooted in trauma is very important. Remember, trauma is a protective mechanism that comes online to protect you from those 7 attributes of harm, right? Of violence: hurt, harm, loss, deficit, injury, death, pain. And we talked about that at the beginning. And the next thing that psychedelics can help with is promoting positive traits. Okay, psychedelics have been shown to increase creative thinking, optimism, compassion, and ideas of unity. And for me, and you can ask Cole this, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about this as well. I had no hope for humanity when I started my psychedelic explorations. Before I started my psychedelic explorations, I had no hope for humanity, zero. And I was a nurse, and I saw all the people that came into the emergency room in despair, distraught, wanting help, feeling hopeless. And I was hopeless. I was like, look at all these people. I've had 10,000 hours in the emergency room and this isn't changing. Nothing's helping. And when I got into my psychedelic explorations, I was able to see things differently. And that's why I do the work that I do now. That's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why I am a firm believer and an advocate in human beings coming to the Condor approach and learning about this, because it's so important. That's why I put all this together. That's why me and Cole have made this our life's work, because we're able to see things differently. So when people are exploring psychedelics, we want to be able to give them tools to support them in actually creating the life that they want to have. Positive traits and dismantling old perspectives. So just to recap, we got into the what and where of war, making sense of war, using the logic ceiling, and how psychedelics can help navigate with wartime situations. And I'm excited about the upcoming Condor approach. It's going to be a group of amazing human beings. The next one is in Austin, Texas, February 22nd to the 24th. And I'm inviting you to register at thecondorapproach.com. I'm telling you, if you're going to be at the Condor approach, at the next Condor approach, let me see it in chat. Let me see it. All right. Nina's coming. McKellen's there. Jen Hardy's. Can't wait. Sweet. Awesome. Fantastic. Brittany Williams is coming. Alana's working on it. Cole, if you could pop in the chat the link to thecondorapproach.com, February 22nd to the 24th. And we're going to have a replay of this up in the Facebook group. And we're going to jump into the Q&A on in the Zoom room. So thank you all so incredibly much for coming to Masterclass Mondays. Next week, we're going to be talking about what is blocking you from growth after a psychedelic experience. So make sure, and we're going to talk about the roadmap to intimacy. And if you haven't experienced the roadmap to intimacy, you absolutely need to be there next week, because I'm going to dive into that If you've been having issues around intimacy and connecting the dots, we're going to talk about that next week. So make sure you come. If you want to be in on these Q&As, make sure you go and register at masterclassmondays.com. And I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you, Facebook. I will catch y'all soon. And all my people, Zoom room, let's get into this Q&A. I love you. Thank you. And have an amazing Monday, y'all. Peace.
Integration is not optional.